Earth had entered a new ice age. Food and heat became more valuable than money, and I was deliciously betrayed. Wow. Okay, just imagine that for a second. That is the brutal, freezing reality our protagonist Han Feng is dealing with right before his own ex-girlfriend and her new lover, by the way, barge into his apartment. Imagine surviving the absolute harshest winter in human history only to have the people you trusted the most literally murder you. And for what? A stale piece of bread and your last remaining heat source? It is just the ultimate betrayal in this apocalyptic world where the temperature outside is a guaranteed death sentence. But, you see, for Han Feng, death is really just the beginning.
So welcome back to The Explainer. Today we are breaking down an absolutely relentless story of survival, strategy, and just some ridiculously overpowered revenge. We're going to be tracking Han Feng's insane journey from a betrayed, helpless victim all the way to this tactical warlord who basically controls the elements. If you are into stories where the main character uses their future knowledge and just pure ruthlessness to outsmart absolutely everyone, oh man, you're going to love this. So let's dive right into the icy depths of this rebirth.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, Betrayal and Cold Rebirth. So here's the real kicker. Han Feng doesn't actually stay dead. He wakes up in his own bed, totally disoriented, sweating, but hey, very much alive. And it doesn't take him long to realize he's been sent back in time, exactly 2 weeks before the world completely freezes over. He's got exactly 14 days to prepare for a literal apocalypse that literally nobody else knows is coming. I mean, think about it. Waking up knowing the world ends in 14 days, what is your very first move? Because when this thing hits, the scale of the disaster is just staggering. On day 1, the temp plummets to minus 20 degrees Celsius. And that's just the start. By day 5, it hits minus 40, and the central heating systems across the entire globe just completely fail. Fast forward to day 19, we are looking at a mind-numbing minus 70 degrees. It gets so unbelievably cold that the oceans themselves freeze solid. Stepping outside literally becomes physically impossible. So Han Feng knows that absolute, zero-mercy preparation is his one and only ticket to survival.
And let me tell you, he does not waste a single second of those 2 weeks. First off, he maxes out massive loans from every single bank he can find. Because let's be real, who cares about a credit score when money won't even exist in a fortnight, right? Second, he hoards an entire year's worth of premium food, fuel, and survival gear. Third, he hires this top-tier construction crew to reinforce his apartment with heavy steel and ultra-durable insulation. He essentially transforms his living room into an impenetrable bunker. And finally, calling in a massive favor from a local gangster connection, he gets his hands on a high-powered sniper rifle. He is absolutely not leaving anything to chance this time around. He completely refuses to be the victim again.
Moving right along to Section 2, Mastering the Neon Powers.
But here's the thing. Preparation is really only half the battle. Because Han Feng quickly figures out his reincarnation came with a massive, mind-bending cheat code. A unique matter manipulation magic system that's triggered purely by his own consciousness. Through some really exhausting, messy, and super physically draining trial and error right there in his kitchen, he discovers these 4 distinct neon lights he can project. First up is the green light. It accelerates plant growth and can even heal wounds. But, and this is a big but, it requires incredibly precise timing. It's kind of like playing a high-stakes rhythm game, or else he instantly turns his fresh food into useless coal. Then you've got the red light, which just disintegrates matter entirely, literally wiping it from reality, but using it leaves him completely drained. The purple light softens and melts solid materials. We're talking turning reinforced steel to jelly in seconds. And finally, the highly volatile yellow light, which merges different properties together. Pushing through the sheer mental toll of learning all this, Han Feng masters these lights so well he can literally duplicate premium steaks and fresh vegetables out of thin air. How insane is that?
So once the apocalypse actually hits and those temperatures plunge, the disparity between Han Feng and literally everyone else is absolutely staggering. Inside his fortified, steel-plated bunker, Han Feng is living like an absolute king. He's kicking back, drinking iced cola, slicing into unlimited premium steak, and sweating in a luxurious bathrobe by a roaring fire. But just on the other side of that reinforced door, the reality of the outside world is an utter nightmare. His neighbors are freezing to death, starving and rioting in these pitch-black hallways as the entire power grid collapses. The world has ended, but for Han Feng, his vacation has basically just begun.
Which brings us to Section 3, Apartment Chaos and Scams.
As society instantly crumbles into dust just outside Hanfang's door, the real monsters of the early apocalypse start to emerge from within his own building. Enter the Interim Committee. Led by this charismatic, sharply dressed manipulator named Mr. Jang, this group pops up under the super comforting guise of quote-unquote unity. But Jang, he operates straight up like a cult leader. He gives these impassioned, sweeping speeches out in the freezing hallways, guilt-tripping desperate, starving residents into donating whatever hidden food stashes they have into a communal pile. But, as Hanfang knows all too well from his past life, the whole thing is a complete scam. Jang uses psychological manipulation to just hoard all the premium resources for himself, and he deliberately incites these starving, violent mobs to raid the apartments of anyone who refuses to play along. He is such a fascinating, terrifyingly realistic villain because he just weaponizes people's desperation.
Now, speaking of villains, we absolutely have to talk about the delightfully petty revenge on Hanfang's traitorous ex-girlfriend, Hyona. Driven by sheer greed, and honestly the memory of how she betrayed him, Hyona tries to use her charms to talk her way into his limitless food supply. And Hanfang? Oh, he plays along entirely just to torture her. He completely ignores her desperate texts for hours, finally baiting her into climbing 16 flights of stairs in a freezing, pitch-dark stairwell. So by the time she reaches his door, she is shivering, totally exhausted, and expecting a nice warm meal. Instead, Hanfang accidentally, on purpose, drops a heavy bag of flour directly onto her head from above. And his grand gift for all her suffering? A sealed bag filled with literal moldy garbage and rotten meat. I mean, it is just an absolute masterclass in petty, deeply satisfying payback.
But look, Hanfang knows he can't survive this brutal new world entirely solo, so he accidentally builds one of the most chaotic, overpowered alliances you could possibly imagine. First up, we have Chu-Chu, this eccentric outcast girl who unironically calls Hanfang the emissary of the evil king. She's got this incredibly rare and overpowered subspace portal ability. Then there's Nurse Jin. She looks like this angelic, soft-spoken healer, but actually possesses terrifying superhuman strength and casually wields a massive Gatling gun while riding, wait for it, a literal polar bear sled. You can't make this stuff up. Finally, there's Brother Lee, a fiercely loyal local gangster who acts as Hanfang's eyes and ears down on the treacherous lower floors. Their insane firepower and completely wild quirks perfectly protect his bunker and complement Hanfang's ruthless, calculating pragmatism.
Now things get really intense in Section 4, the superhuman mutant threat. The story abruptly shifts gears from petty apartment politics to all-out war when heavily armed superhuman factions start roaming the frozen wasteland outside. A massive military faction, led by a seriously ruthless guy named Captain Scar, rocks up to the apartment complex offering sanctuary. But you really have to ask yourself, in a completely frozen wasteland where agriculture is completely dead and supply chains have been shattered for weeks, what exactly is this massive, heavily fortified military base feeding its soldiers to keep them so insanely strong?
Yeah, the horrifying truth completely shatters any illusion of safety. The military base isn't a sanctuary at all. They are hoarding human survivors as cattle for slaughter. They are actively hunting terrified people in the snow, eating the dead, and feeding the living to sustain their superhuman troops. This grim cannibalism plot twist violently raises the stakes. It forces Hanfang to realize a pretty terrifying truth. He can't just hide in his bunker forever. If an army of superhuman cannibals is hunting humans, his well-stocked apartment isn't a fortress. To them, it's basically just a heavily guarded pantry. He has to wipe this faction off the face of the earth.
So, to stop them from breaching his home, Hanfang has to face down their vanguard, this monstrous, mutated superhuman known as the Big Baby. It is a cinematic clash of total opposites. On one side, Hanfang has to rely entirely on his razor-sharp tactical mind, rapidly switching between his neon light combinations to control the battlefield from a distance. And on the other side, the Big Baby is just pure, terrifying brute strength, a walking juggernaut literally capable of tearing apart concrete sewer systems and armored military jeeps with his bare, mutated hands. So how exactly does Hanfang survive being cornered by a literal monster? He totally dissects the battlefield. Step 1. As the giant charges, Hanfang blasts the tunnel floor with his purple light, turning solid, freezing concrete into viscous jelly, instantly sinking the giant and trapping his heavily armed escort troops right in the floor. Step 2. Before the soldiers can even react and aim their weapons, Hanfang pulses his red light, literally disintegrating their automatic rifles out of reality, leaving them clutching nothing but thin air. Step 3.
Pushing his powers to the absolute brink of exhaustion, he uses his yellow light to forcefully merge the remaining scrap metal into a crude, deadly blade to finish the job. In one fluid, brutal sequence, he goes from this cautious survivor hiding behind steel doors to an absolute menace on the battlefield.
And that leads us straight into Section 5, the ultimate base raid.
But look, taking out the Vanguard just isn't going to cut it. Han Fang knows that if he just waits around in his apartment, this ruthless military faction will eventually regroup and bomb his home into absolute oblivion. So what does he do? He takes the fight directly to them. But he's walking into an absolute nightmare of a situation. He's facing three major, highly trained threats. You've got Dami Mami, a terrifying superhuman who can turn anything she touches, even the very air around her, into a lethal explosive. Then there's Captain Scar, this sadistic leader who manipulates deadly, searing blue fire that burns even in -70-degree weather. And finally, the Ice Boy, a mutant who can control the snow around them to summon massive, crushing avalanches just at will. You really have to wonder, how can Han Fang, who is essentially a guy with some glowing lights and a sniper rifle, possibly survive a 3-on-1 fight against these absolute monsters?
Well, he survives by not fighting them head-on. Han Fang uses his brain. Armed with his sniper rifle, winter camouflage, and his neon abilities, he ghosts his way deep behind enemy lines while they are busy preparing their assault. His strategy is just brilliant and utterly ruthless. Rather than engaging three overpowered mutants in open, fair combat, he infiltrates their heavily guarded base to systematically rig their fuel barrels and their primary armory to detonate. He doesn't want to beat them in a fistfight. He wants to erase their entire infrastructure off the map.
Which leaves us with one final, explosive question. With the fuel barrels rigged, the armory primed to blow, and the lethal, searing blue fire of Captain Scar suddenly bearing down on him, can Han Fang actually escape the superhuman counterattack before the entire military base, and himself along with it, goes up in flames? It is a massive cliffhanger that completely flips the script on what it takes to survive the Ice Age. From a betrayed victim to the mastermind of an apocalyptic base raid, his journey is just unforgettable. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I will see you guys in the next one.